Welcome to February, everyone. It promises to have massive temperature swings as well as multiple winter storms as the polar vortex looks to come back with a lot of heavy snow and much colder air as we head into that second week of February. So let's take a look at the setup going forward, and we're going to have to go way out in the Pacific for our first storm system because that's going to be a big time significant mid-latitude cyclone event, another atmospheric river that is forming out there in the Pacific, and that is going to set up a steady stream of moisture with a conveyor belt of moisture that actually highlights and moves over the Hawaiian Islands and has its projectile into northern California as well as into southern Oregon with multiple rounds of heavy rain that starts today that goes into Sunday, Monday, as well as into Tuesday night. But down there in Hawaii, it just gets crushed. Even the Big Island at the top, at the summit, where they're having like blizzard-like conditions, some 85-mile-per-hour wind gust, 10 to 15 inches of snow on top of the mountains there. Further south towards the ground, we're talking some very heavy rain and some higher winds. So it's just going to be a nasty setup with that conveyor belt of moisture that's going to be impacting areas in northern California and southern Oregon over the next couple of days. And then eventually that will drag the snow inward, tapping into some of that colder air mass. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel to keep you well ahead of the storm. So here's the setup going forward on the jet stream. We do in fact have the zonal flow, the more west-east progression that comes in off the Pacific. That's typically a warmer flow. So further south of this line, that's where all the warmer anomalies are going to take place. In fact, it's going to feel a lot more like springtime conditions. Further north, that's the polar jet. That's the colder side of the air mass. And then you got a conveyor belt of moisture coming in off the Hawaiian Islands, off in from the Pacific. That's what's going to bring our heavy rains, high wind threat, and then eventually some snow into the interior regions of the Intermountain West. And it's going to be fighting that battle zone. So here's the setup. That colder air, that brutal cold air, doesn't really last too long up there into Alaska as the ridging will start to build back in over the top. That will set up a trough that will be underneath, and that's going to be pressing against this ridge southbound and set up our battle zone that will take shape with the well above average temperature anomalies. In fact, some of these areas across the southern plains in Texas could be some record-breaking temperatures on Monday. There could be even some areas in Texas pushing 90 degrees, folks. Yeah, significant warm up on the table, but don't let that fool you, folks, because we do have winter coming back with a vengeance, coming back into that second week of February. So right now, going towards the third, right off the Groundhog Day, we'll have that conveyor belt of moisture just coming in off the California coast, then pushing that heavier snows inland into the higher elevations of Oregon, back into Idaho with the conveyor belt of moisture through areas of the Dakotas, swinging into northern portions of Minnesota, back into Wisconsin, as well as into areas of the Great Lakes. Here is our first winter storm that will take place. So you got heavier rains into the southern branches of the jet stream, the lower elevations, and then some of the higher elevations. We've got the moderate, you've got some major impacts with that heavy snows that's going to be pummeling this area between now and Tuesday. And then once it moves inland, where we still have some heavier snows through the Dakotas, back into Minnesota, only about minor impacts with some of that lighter snow that will likely unfold. Here's some of your preliminary snow totals that's going to unfold over the next couple of days. So we'll have that conveyor belt of moisture come inland. We'll have feet of snow up here into the mountain regions. And then once it presses inland through Montana, we'll still have some more significant snows with some 8 to 12 inch totals. Once you move into the Dakotas, now we're talking 3 to 5 inches. We get up here towards the Duluth region. We're talking 6 to 7 inches of snow back into Minnesota, areas of Wisconsin, through northern areas of Michigan. And then once we swing over into upstate New York, getting into Vermont, New Hampshire, back into Maine, again, another 3 to probably 6-inch snow swath between now and Tuesday night. And here's the rain aspects of it too. So most of this rain is going to be in Northern California. That's where you're going to be hit the hardest. We could be looking at several inches of rain. Some areas could even get 4 to 7 inches of heavier rain, lighter amounts as you swing further north into Eugene, back into Boise, as well as into Idaho Falls. But nonetheless, a pretty significant event, but it's mainly targeting Northern California. But now let's take a look at the stratosphere, because we got a lot going on, folks. February promises to be an active month, and it's all going to be dependent on this polar vortex. So right now, we're looking at a little bit more significant event unfolding. We're getting a little bit of a reprieve. That's when the polar vortex is a little bit stronger side, where it's more or less into a ball. But once we hit the 4th, right, this is February 4th, you can see more the elongation, the stretching of it. That's when it tries to pull some of that Arctic air up there in the Arctic further south into the lower 48, and much colder air will come back in the picture as we head into the second week of February. Now, we could turn to a little bit more significant threat if this actually comes to fruition. Notice we go back and go deeper in time towards the February 13th timeframe. Now, this is a little bit of a lagging indicator, but this looks to be possibly even a little bit more significant event if this polar vortex actually separates itself and actually becomes dislodged and has more of a split. Now, not only are we talking cold, we could be talking significantly colder weather on the table heading in towards that second half of February. But right now, we definitely have confirmation of at least a stretching event that's going to unfold as we head into that second week of February. Now we look at more confirmation and head towards Europe. Now, typically, once Europe gets cold, then the United States can get cold. And that's exactly what's going to happen as we get deeper into the next week. We see well below average temperature anomalies for a good part of Europe. So that's always a good sign. If you want colder air to come back into the lower 48, that's at least one piece of confirmation that you look at. And another piece of confirmation is the teleconnections, because it has to come from well above in the mid latitudes of the atmosphere. And if we're looking at all the teleconnections, this is the Arctic oscillation. Look at the trend, right? We are positive, meaning we're above average right now, which we are, but the trend is heading into that second week of February, as it trends much further southbound, and actually it even gets deeper negative going into that second week of February, and especially towards that middle part of February. Here's your EPO, your East Pacific oscillation. Again, predominantly negative over the next 2 weeks, driving that colder air down from Canada all the way into the lower 48. This is your NAO, your North Atlantic oscillation, continuing to trend negatively. And the deeper we get in February, the more negative it gets, right? This is your middle part of the month. Now we're turned to the West Pacific oscillation, your WPO. Again, that's negative as well. Now let's look at the PNA, your Pacific North American, how that's negative as well. So you see all teleconnections trending negative. So that must be one thing. Colder air is definitely coming back for the lower 48. There is definitely no question with this one. Now let's talk about the setup going forward. So we do have a little bit more of a zonal flow to begin next week. Now the transition into more of a battle zone. Once we get that atmospheric river event out of the way on Tuesday night, that's going to allow a little bit more colder air to come in from Alaska up there into British Columbia into the lower 48. But that's also going to tap into some of that abundance amount of moisture from that atmospheric river, and that's going to be changing over to more snow back into the Dakotas, back into Minnesota, as well as into Wisconsin. Could be even some ice starting to set up there, those areas into Iowa and southern portions of Wisconsin, as we'll start to see the colder air start to filter a little bit further south as we head into that Friday of the upcoming week. But notice the cooler anomalies, or the much more warmer anomalies, beginning to start feeling the effects of some of that colder air coming in from the north. So the breakdown from now into the next 7 days, most of the action is going to be off the West Coast. That's where we're going to take the brunt of the heavy rain, especially in Northern California. Unfortunately, you miss out on it on the desert Southwest. You really miss out most of it onto the central U.S. You have a little bit higher precipitation up there towards Tennessee, back into Kentucky, as well as into southern Illinois, Indiana, especially heavier amounts as we go into West Virginia and back into Pennsylvania. And of course, some of this will be in the form of snow the further north you get within that polar jet stream. But things turn southbound as we head into that second week of February. Now we're talking, it starts to begin the effects and feeling the effects of that polar vortex stretching, coming down from the stratosphere through the mid-latitudes and filtering down into the lower 48. Now we're talking a much different air mass, looking at the P&A going well negative, looking at the EPO going well negative. That puts this Arctic intrusion of the air mass coming into Montana, back into the Dakotas. Much colder air starts eating the way of the ridge by then down further south, and then that will set up more snow along that region. So as the snow line drops further south, we should start to see more heavy snow, especially back into that second week of February, back into Minnesota, as well as into Iowa now. Now, northern Illinois, yes, you guys, you're in the major deficit right now. So you got a lot of catching up to do with some more heavy snow coming back in the picture. And that's just the beginning of what's to come in the month of February. Very active month through Pennsylvania. And we already have a moderate risk for excessive heavy snow all the way into that second week of February from the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, back into Vermont, New Hampshire, as well as into Maine. But yes, the deeper we get into that second week of February, now we're talking more Arctic air to start pummeling into the lower 48, especially down there into the central plains. We're talking temperatures easily 30 degrees below average. A more significant event is definitely going to be on the table, starting to feel that Arctic intrusion that's likely coming back. And that's just going to push the jet stream further south as well. So this is what the jet stream could potentially look like heading into, say, that 11th or 12th time frame. It's pretty far south again, heading into Texas, heading into Oklahoma, through Arkansas again. So that puts the northern branch, the north areas of that, into play of wintry precipitation. And it could even be a little bit further south than this. But nonetheless, it tells you more significant winter weather is likely going to be on the table heading into that second week of February. So we could be looking at a pretty significant winter storm setting up shop through the panhandle of Texas, through Oklahoma, back through Kansas and Nebraska, through Missouri, back into Illinois. And that would just be likely some heavier snows filtering in through the panhandle, down here up into the areas of the Ohio Valley, swinging into areas of the Great Lakes as more of that colder air starts to come back. So the deeper we get into that second week of February, and especially as we head towards that middle part of February, remember the P&A does go a little bit more positive heading towards that middle part of February. And that's exactly what this is implying, as the colder air would not only just push further south by then, but now we're talking it gets into the eastern half of the U.S. and finally starts to eat away that southeast ridge that's going to be predominant between now and the next 10 days down there into the southeast. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch my next update. Why I protect you before and after the storm.